West Ham have been linked with a transfer move for Manchester City's Kalvin Phillips as part of a Declan Rice sort of swap deal. We give Manchester City Declan Rice, we get Kalvin Phillips and some money. I don't want to go into the fine details of it. Number one, I don't believe it. I do think he's probably going to Arsenal. Number two, it could just be a made-up story. We've just had the transfer window, right? But I do think it's sort of, it focuses in on a couple of things that are very wrong with West Ham. So as I say, I don't want to focus too much on it, say I believe it and go too hard at West Ham, but it does bring into focus our recruitment policy, because as far as I can see, there's one really, really good reason not to sign Kalvin Phillips, and that's because he's injury prone. But let's just move away from Kalvin Phillips, because I think, as I say, it makes you have a little look at some of the West Ham signings. And for this reason, I just think we need to massively overhaul our scouting system in light of what we've recently seen. As whilst I discount this story about Kalvin Phillips, he is exactly the type of player that we would go and sign. An established Premier League player, in Phillips' case international as well. Really good player, by the way. Excellent footballer. But he's injury prone. And we are terrible at scouting for this. It's so funny. We talk about the David Moyes MOT. He'll go into, it seems like, minute detail to evaluate someone's personality, to evaluate their character, to evaluate their mental capacity to play for West Ham, to fit within the group. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think that's great. What it does is hopefully it eradicates any unsavoury characters, let's say, anyone that might upset the group and upset the dynamic of a bunch of people that work together every day. Totally get that. But what we do, and this is not just David Moyes' fault, by the way. It's something historically that we've done very, very badly at West Ham, and that is to scout for injury. Why would you go into such massive detail in one area but then totally neglect something else? So I started thinking about, the players that have come in. Scamacca appears to be a little bit injury prone, even though there's been no major injury there. Was there any evidence to suggest that would happen? But even leave Scamacca for 1 second. So I started to look at some of the others, and particularly the people we will go and spend decent money on. Maxwell Cornet would be the big one. I'm going to talk about someone else in particular, but just Cornet, we know this. Cornet arrived at West Ham with a reputation that he had at Burnley for not being available, for picking up injuries. So it's really no surprise. We were told this. I didn't know it. Gio told me on a video. One of the first times he said we've signed Maxwell Cornet, and Gio said it was a genuine complaint of the Burnley fans that basically that they would have stayed up if Maxwell Cornet would have been fit all season. So he's injury prone, he gets injuries. Okay, got it. Understood. In which case, why did we sign him? Because we haven't had value for money. And if it was just an isolated signing, you think, fine, okay, I get it. No problem. Move on to the next one. However, when I started to look at Kurt Zouma. And this is Kurt Zouma's injury record. I'm going to read it for you now. I like Zouma. Really good player. Excellent player, by the way. But when you start looking at his injury record, do you think we should have spent whatever you think it might be? 25, 27, 30 million. Depends what newspaper you read. Depends how much money we paid for him. Lot of money, lot of wages. When he's fit, he's brilliant, isn't he? But that's it really, when he's fit. So how likely is he to be fit? Well, bearing in mind, this is the information leading up to the point where we signed him, and then I'll go into the injuries he's had at West Ham. So this is going back to May the 3rd, 2012. May the 3rd, 2012. Knee surgery. Straight away. Okay. And then you get to September, September 2012. So he's out for 98 days after the knee surgery. Then he comes back, 13th of September, more knee problems. Then he gets to October, still in 2012 here, damages his ankle, sprained ankle. He then gets back, he's out for 3 weeks. He then comes back, the start of the next year, 2013, sprains his ankle again. Now, what we're going to go through here are a series of knee and ankle problems, which basically, by the end of it, you're going to conclude that we knew he was injured before we signed him. Knee injury. May the 11th, 2015. Misses 2.5 months. Here's a big one. 2016, so a year later, so less than a year actually, February 2016, cruciate ligament rupture. He's out for 287 days. Should we call it a year? Year between friends? Then it gets to 2018, so 2 years after that. So bearing in mind, he spent a year on the touchline. He gets back. He plays nearly a year. Knee injury. March 29th, 2018. Gets some minor injuries, which I won't bother going into. Gets injured again, 2021. Then, of course, and now we're at West Ham, 2022. There's the ankle again, injured his ankle, sprained ankle. Then, November 2022, another knee injury. What's actually worrying is now I'm looking at the physio report. It's also reporting he's got a hamstring injury now, which obviously we know he's out now, no surprise there. I've actually left out the hamstring injuries. There's 5 or 6 hamstring injuries in the list there as well. I don't think there's any way that you can read that report and surmise that he is not injury prone. That's an injury prone player. Now, I don't want to go too much on Agurd. Agurd looks an absolute quality player. Agurd injured his ankle. It was an unfortunate injury. I don't think Agurd's injury prone, but he injured his ankle with the sort of way he twisted, trying to do a recovery tackle in a pre-season friendly against Rangers. It's not Agurd's first ankle injury. And when you start to look at our signings and you start to look at the players who are out injured for West Ham, you start thinking, what the hell are we doing? Surely this would in some way impact the way in which we recruit, the way in which we scout. As I say, everyone's scouting, forget the Moyes MOT, everyone's scouting for how well someone can kick a ball and their technical ability and their passing stats and all the rest of it. But injury status is a relevant category to scout for, right? Just don't think we do it. As I say, it's not all down to David Moyes. I'm not suggesting that. We've done it for quite a long time. Then, of course, you get to, when you start factoring in all of these players that we've had that get injured, and not everyone gets injured, okay? Thomas Souček doesn't get injured. I get it. There's some that don't. Declan Rice more or less doesn't get injured. So it's not everyone. But my point is, the fact that we bought them and they didn't have injury records, and then not Declan Rice obviously, and then they go on not to get injured. Well, that sort of makes sense. My problem is us buying players that are clearly injury prone, which is why when I read the Kalvin Phillips rumours, surely not. He would just arrive and he would just break down. And then, so we're gambling every time. And then you get to this Danny Ings transfer, who is clearly a good player. I'm not arguing with that. And I do understand that he had a period of, 2.5 years, let's call it that, without getting a serious injury. He had a good run of games. Well, actually, you can look at Kurt Zouma's record, just looking at it again, and I'm pretty sure from 2012 until now, you can probably find a little period of 2.5 years-ish. You probably can. Maybe not. Maybe Kurt Zouma's slightly more injury prone than Danny Ings, but there's not a lot in it. My point is, if I pulled up Danny Ings' stats now and looked for it, and I'm not going to bother, I'm not going to do it because I know they would read like this, then what you would see is somebody that is susceptible to injury. And what you're doing is you're buying these players, and whether you think that Danny Ings wasn't much of a liability in terms of, talking financial liability here in terms of the £12 million outlay with £3 million worth of add-ons, there's still a lot of money tied up in terms of weekly wages. He's on over 100 grand a week. We know Kurt Zouma's on 125 grand a week, for instance. When you start doing this, when you start buying these players, you do wonder what the hell is going on with our scouting. And it actually made me think of something else. So you can understand why I saw Kalvin Phillips. You know what would happen. We sign Kalvin Phillips. We sign him. He comes in. He gets injured. You know it. I know it. I don't think we'll sign him. But the fact that we're looking at him, or may have been looking at him, is still a worry. It really is. I think Kurt Zouma will be a good player for West Ham. I just think he'll play, I don't know. If he's available in his West Ham career for 300 games, I think you find he might play 150 of them or something like that. Now, someone that plays 150 games for you is still a good player. Don't get me wrong, but I think we need to be better at doing this. And the one other thing that I noticed, and it's just sort of played in while I was giving it some thought about the centre-back situation and the injury crisis, was Luis Sal. Now, Luis Sal, as you may well know, we've just signed him from the Brazilian league. I think it was Sao Paulo. Young, promising player. That's it. That's all he is. He's a young, promising player. But he's not a kid. We've not signed a kid. He's a fully grown man. He's in his 20s. He's a big guy, 6'4", something like that. He's vast, strong, which is exactly what he was saying. Now, he came over to West Ham and he's gone straight into the development squad or whatever you want to call it. Highly thought of in... They didn't want to lose him. I don't think his club wanted to lose him. In Brazil, he's relatively highly thought of, but not a world beater, okay? He came over, he signed for the academy. In the same way, if you remember, we signed, we signed him from Silkeborg, didn't we? Didn't really work out. These players don't get a sniff under David Moyes, of course. And it was his comments, it was Luis Sal's comments that really made me think, mate, you don't have a clue, do you? You really don't have a clue. So his comments were, he was doing his interview. A lot of them will do a stock interview on the West Ham website, on the West Ham channel, on the club's own media platforms. And he was very much aware in his interview that the club were having a centre-back crisis. And he said, I just want to let the manager know that I'm here, I'm available. And he listed his qualities. He said, I'm ready to go, I'm big, I'm strong, I'm fast, I feel that I can adapt to the Premier League. He was selling himself, absolutely right, no problem, good on you, mate. Selling himself. But you couldn't help but read it and think, oh, mate, you haven't got a clue, have you? This will all be falling on deaf ears. There are no set of circumstances where you get into that first team. Not now, anyway. And I'm being kind there, because actually if I'm really... not being diplomatic about it, I think actually it ain't ever happening. And that's nothing to do with his ability or whatever. I've seen enough evidence. Doesn't have to be him, could be Elisa, could be anyone else. I just think it ain't happening. Which does make you wonder about the disconnect between the first team and the players that are being recruited. I'm not talking about the academy here, we've already done that one, we've already spoken about that one. Because when he was saying these words, those aren't the words of somebody who had lost all hope. Those are the words of somebody who was encouraged, who thought there is a pathway to the first team for me here. And you made you think, oh mate, that's probably not going to happen for you. So you do wonder what they're being told at the point they're joining. You do wonder if they're getting a fair and realistic appraisal of the situation at West Ham. And, you hear all this stuff and it is promising. Gio's video, when he did the video about us setting up the scouting network in South America, that sounds great. It really does. That's an admirable thing to do, and it's the right thing to do in many, many circumstances. But I think it's also a futile exercise. I think it's a complete waste of time, if truth be known, because they're just we will not sign these players. Just honestly, the prospect of West Ham signing some tricky Brazilian winger and we sign him up and we bring him over and he goes into the under-21 squad, and that's it. The thought of David Moyes looking at the under-21 squad thinking, I like this, whatever, it's Marvelinho. I made that up. He's great, let's get him in the first team. Just think, it's not gonna happen. So I think the scouting, there's something wrong with the scouting, and I think the annoying thing is this scouting system that's been implemented by David Moyes. And I think when it churns up players like Jarrod Bowen, it's good. But Jarrod Bowen was not an unheard of gem. We used to do these, when we used to do live videos and we'd do questions, and people would say it in the chat, go and get Jarrod Bowen from Hull. I mean, everyone knew about Jarrod Bowen, not just in football terms, fans knew about Jarrod Bowen. He was one of the exceptional players. He was scoring a hat full of goals in the Championship at the time. So I don't understand what's happening. I don't understand what the point of this scouting network is. Because actually what's happening is the scouting network is signing up a load of people who are never going to be used by the first team and spotting some untapped talent over in South America, but they come over to the development squad and then nothing happens. Not just them, by the way. You look at look, we've actually brought other people. I think Ekwa was brought in from Chelsea's academy. He's now, I think, Okoflex came over didn't we sign him from Celtic? He goes into the academy. My point is not that maybe Okoflex goes on and becomes a world-class player. He might not. He might just be a journeyman footballer. But my point is the person that's bringing those players into that academy, I don't feel is in any way joined up with what David Moyes wants to do. I think there's a complete disconnect behind it. I think the scouting network is broken from that aspect of things. But also when you then look at it, you put this scouting network into place, and then what you come up with at the end of it is, okay, who should we sign? What players like Brighton would sign? Unheard of players? No, that's not what we're doing here. As you look at the list, you think, Danny Ings, Kalvin Phillips. I think it needs a refresh.